We've heard from Wolf Blitzer and some of our other colleagues around the world that apparently the bombing is in a lull right now. I mean, there are not any attacks underway right now, and there's some sort of a damage assessment underway. Does the president have to give another decision to continue to go in after he gets that, or what is the White House determining right now?
Well, it would seem to me that very much the shift is now over to the Pentagon to continue its plan here. As Wolf indicates, you bomb and then you assess. It's now come to daylight over in the Persian Gulf area, so satellites can be effective at that. Interestingly, in my thinking, the president has repeatedly told us that this is going to be short, and it's going to be dramatic, and it's going to be massive, and it's going to be effective, and he's going to win. We did hear that Secretary Cheney this evening said that this is going to continue for some time. So maybe there is a semantic difference on opposite sides of the Potomac River here. The president certainly has unleashed a massive attack. Just how long Secretary Cheney has in mind, we really don't know at this point.
Okay, Charles Bierbauer reporting live from the White House. Thank you very much. Of course, he'll keep us updated with the latest developments from there. Susan?
I have been told that British Prime Minister John Major will hold a news conference at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. CNN will carry that news conference live. Of course, news from the Gulf has had a dramatic, often immediate impact on world financial markets. CNN's Bill Hartley is standing by in New York. Bill, what's happening on the world financial markets that are open at this point, and what's happening to the price of oil?
Well, Susan, they seem to be celebrating. The markets, of course, woke up to war, which frightened them quite a bit. Initial reaction sent stock prices lower, pushed oil prices higher. Then, with no real retaliation seen from Iraq, markets have turned around with a vengeance. At mid-afternoon in Tokyo, stocks are showing a fair gain. Japan's Nikkei average is up 745 points. That's a swing of 1,000 points from earlier in the day. Oil prices are pulling back as well. Britain's Brent North Sea crude trading now in Asia on a cash basis is priced at this hour at $27 a barrel. That's down $2 from its Wednesday Houston close, below pre-attack levels. For a perspective on oil trading in the first hours of war, we go to Peter Jaco, head of Lehman Brothers International Petroleum Trading Desk in London. He joins me on the phone. Good morning, Peter. That's quite a swing in oil from about up $3 a barrel to down $2. Why? What's happened? What are the markets saying?
Bill, initially we had very strong buying coming from the Pacific region. Our Brent traded up as high as $4.20 over the Houston close. As the president spoke, the market made the assumption that things were going exceedingly well, and the prices started to fall. Buyers withdrew entirely, sellers becoming aggressive. At this moment, we have sellers in the Brent at $2 down. That's $27 a barrel.
Are markets betting this whole thing's over, Peter?
I'm not sure they're saying that, but for the moment, the market's quite calm. It's taken a look at the SPR announcement, i.e. the reserve drawdown that's to take effect in the United States, and people just are taking it easy.
We heard some reports that a Kuwaiti refinery had been hit in the bombing. What have you heard on that?
We've heard similar reports. That refinery has been out of action since the invasion anyway, and was quite a small refinery, so it would rank as insignificant.
Is there any indication, do you think, that the Iraqis, if they do finally withdraw or forced out, will sort of go out on a scorched earth policy and the Kuwaiti oil fields set them afire?
It's difficult to say, but at this stage they've scorched so much of Kuwait already and taken so many things of value from Kuwait. One has to assume they've taken refinery stocks, refinery equipment, and spare parts. So the rebuilding process will be expensive and reasonably time-consuming.
All right, Peter, one final question, and also on price. If this is over, if in a few days everything settles down, where do you see the price of crude going?
Well, we're under pressure now, Bill, and I think that pressure will continue.
All right, Peter Jaco, thank you very much. I might add, Peter's been at work for several hours in London and on Wall Street. Traders have been heading down to Wall Street here in New York for some hours, anticipating a very good day. One final note, several American oil companies say they will do their part in the Gulf War. Mobil, Chevron, and Arco, and Conoco as well, saying they will freeze wholesale prices of gasoline. That's it for now from the CNN Business News Desk in New York. I'm Bill Hartley.
Right now for the very latest from the Eastern Saudi Arabian perspective, CNN's Charles Jaco is there live, and he joins us now with the very latest. Charles?
Yes, good morning, Patrick, from a rainy and drizzly Saudi Arabia, where it's about 20 to 8 in the morning. We've just been in contact with Saudi Arabian television to clarify a report earlier. Saudi TV tells us that they are not reporting that Saddam Hussein's palace is burning. They say that the area near Saddam Hussein's palace is on fire, but they have no information that the building that houses the palace itself is burning. We just received a pool report in from an airbase somewhere in eastern Saudi Arabia that may give you an indication of what happened during the fighting last night. Ground crews say that none of the first 6 F-15s that landed back at the base had fired any of their air-to-air missiles, nor had they jettisoned their extra fuel tanks. What that means simply is they ran into no aerial opposition, and there were no aerial dogfights. We're led to understand that the first pool television pictures, the first video from this, from ships or the ground, we're not sure, should be available in about an hour and a half. We'll keep tuned to see how that develops. We're also led to understand here from military sources that none of the big aerial guns in the U.S. arsenal, the B-52 bombers, were used in this raid at all, that they remain parked at their bases and were not used. Now, many of the military people here, both U.S. and Saudi, are urging a bit of caution. They're jubilant, of course, over what they see from their perspective as the immense success of this airstrike. However, they caution that none of the ground forces have been used yet. If the reports out of the Pentagon are true and that the Republican Guards, Iraq's elite forces, have been decimated, that might mean something. However, they caution that if Iraq is not willing to give up Kuwait, a long and perhaps bitter ground campaign could ensue. We'll have to wait and see how that develops. No counterstrike, according to Saudi military sources, of any kind was launched. They had no information of any Scud missiles or even any Iraqi Air Force planes making it in the air to come toward this direction in Saudi Arabia to try some sort of strike inside Saudi. Right now, from the point of view of the Saudi, U.S., and British military people we've spoken to here, the operation so far is an unqualified success, but they say that is so far. We'll have to wait and see what develops. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Charles Jaco, thank you very much. We'll be checking in with you a little bit later. Susan?
John Sweeney is on the phone with us now from Riyadh. John, what is the latest from your perspective?
Susan, the streets of Riyadh look like any other workday morning. It's very difficult to determine from this vantage point that there is, in fact, this country is at war. At last report, Saudi King Fahd was meeting with his top ministers here in the Saudi capital. No word on that meeting, but undoubtedly the ministers are very happy with the first reports they are getting. As we understand it, the king gave permission to launch an attack from Saudi soil following a Wednesday morning meeting between Secretary of State James Baker and Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar. The first indication here in Riyadh that something was up came about 2 hours before the attack, when several KC-135 tanker refueling planes took off with a thunderous roar from an airbase nearby. We now know the planes were launched to provide in-flight fuel for the hundreds of combat aircraft sorties involved in the attack. And shortly after the attack, General Norman Schwarzkopf issued a communique to his troops. He said in part, and I'm quoting, "Our cause is just. Now you must be the thunder and lightning of Desert Storm. May God be with you," said the general, "your loved ones at home and our country." Susan?
All right, thank you, CNN's John Sweeney, keeping us up to date with the very latest from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And this just in, Saddam Hussein has addressed his people, speaking on Baghdad radio today as it is now 20 of 8 in the morning, Baghdad time. Saddam Hussein said, quote, "The mother of all battles has started." Baghdad radio also said that Iraq would never surrender, and it called on the population to resist U.S.-led forces. Baghdad radio said, "We will never surrender." Again, that's the latest from Baghdad Radio, where it is coming up on 8 o'clock in the morning there. Patrick?
Right now, as you know, hundreds of thousands of American families have been affected by this operation, and we're going to go to CNN's John Zarrella right now, who is at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina with the very latest and some perspective from there. John?
Good evening, Patrick. Indeed, we are just a few miles from Patrick Air Force Base, and certainly many of the people here behind me, their lives have been affected tonight by what has happened in the Middle East. Many of the people who used to come into this bar are probably pilots who were flying sorties tonight. We talked to a few of the folks here. Many have relatives. Richard, your father is over in the Middle East right now, and he services F-16 fighters. What are your feelings tonight?
Well, my feelings for my dad are like everyone else. We're all praying for their safe return.
You're confident in the kind of work your father's doing over there? You're proud of him?
Yes, I'm very proud. He does everything with the best of his abilities.
Lisa, you're over here drinking a Coke, kind of relaxed. It's been watching CNN all night here, and your mother works over at Shaw Air Force Base, and you have lots of friends that are over there.
Yes, I do.
Your feelings?
Well, I just wish that they would return home safely, and I'm just praying for them.
You think that the right action was taken by the president?
Yes, I do. I'm behind him 100%, and I have a feeling I know what he's doing, and it's best for the United States.
All right, thank you, Lisa. I'm going to wander across over here to the other side, and another table, and talk first with Mike. And Mike, you're a reservist. You haven't been activated yet, but your feeling?
No, sir, I haven't been activated. I'm behind what the president has, is what he's done, and if I am activated, I'll be willing to go.
A tough night, you think, for everyone, though?
I think it's hard on everybody, but I think that he's doing the right thing, the president is.
Heath, over in the corner, you've got friends over there, too. And I guess just about everybody here has friends, at least, if not relatives there. Your feelings about what's been going on?
Well, I think it was long overdue, and I'm glad we finally did something about it. And I'm behind the president 100%, and I hope we really kick their butts. How about that?
I imagine the feeling, though, from most everyone in here, though, being so close to people here, is that it will be over fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think, well, like President Bush said today, we have 28 countries behind us. And I think with 28 countries against a little small place like Iraq, I don't think it should really take that long before, he pulls out of Kuwait. He should know that we will overpower him.
I think one thing that needs to be emphasized somewhat is that since all of this began here, this particular sports bar, Legacy's here, many of the people that do come here, as I mentioned at the beginning, are pilots who are serving over there, and again, may have flown sorties tonight into Iraq. And no one here really knows what's happened or to what extent anyone may have been hurt over there, but they're all watching. They've been watching all night here, waiting for the latest information. But the one sense that you get from everyone here is the sense that they are all very proud. Sumter is a small town, a small city in South Carolina, and just about everyone has some affiliation with Shaw Air Force Base here, which is the home of two of the F-16 squadrons that are over there, some 48 aircraft. And when you go into Shaw Air Force Base, at the front of Shaw Air Force Base, when you walk in as a slogan, our mission is to fly, to fight, and to win. And everyone here in Sumter, South Carolina, and here tonight is very proud of the fact that these men are over there and the job that they're doing. This is John Zarrella reporting live from Sumter, South Carolina.
John Zarrella, thank you very much. Susan?
Thank you. And updating the story just in, we don't know when Saddam Hussein broadcast a message to the Iraqi people saying the mother of all battles has begun. Baghdad radio, by the way, was off the air for several hours at the very beginning of the U.S.-led attack on the capital of Iraq. But Saddam Hussein has now broadcast a message to his people. We don't know if it was recorded before or after or during the attack. Again, the message was that the mother of all battles has started. The radio said, we will never surrender, and urged the Iraqi people to resist the U.S.-led attack. Of course, in the United States, the very divided Congress over the weekend gave President Bush the authorization to use force if necessary to eject Iraq from Kuwait. CNN's Bob Franken is standing by now on Capitol Hill. Bob, now that the president has exercised that option, that offensive military option, what is the reaction from your standpoint?
Well, first of all, Susan, there were some formalities to take care of, and this is the kind of thing that will be written about in history books. The various leaders in Congress were notified either by the president or by top members of his administration. House Speaker Tom Foley's office got a call about 5:30 asking that the speaker find a secure telephone line, which he did, and the president then told him of the upcoming operation. One of the requirements of the legislation that passed over the weekend is that the president certify that all economic and diplomatic means to try and convince Iraq to leave Kuwait had been exhausted. That certification arrived in the speaker's hands, we're told, at 6:35, and shortly thereafter, the offensive pounding began against Iraq. It wasn't too long after that before there was quick congressional reaction.
I'm glad to see us going in real strength and not piecemealing things as we did in Vietnam. In war, moderation is not to be admired in war. Moderation, as I said on the Senate floor the other day, is self-defeating in combat. And so I'm glad to see us going in with real power, and to hope that Saddam Hussein, even at this late time, will realize what he's up against and withdraw.
At this point, I think there are really two critical questions. First, have we succeeded in knocking out enough of his missile capability that he has made a tragic mistake in apparently deciding to wait before counterattacking us? If we've knocked out enough of his missile capability, Saddam may find himself in daylight, when we've always felt he would be most likely to try to counterattack us, with very little resource left to make such a counterattack. And that, of course, could contribute very significantly to an early victory. The other question that's very hard for any of us to answer at this point is whether or not the attack from the air today will have broken the morale of the ground forces.
As you can imagine, most of the reaction on Capitol Hill was supportive, if not of the president, then of the fighting men and women in the Persian Gulf. One exception was California Congressman Ron Dellums, a Democrat, who said, "I am outraged by and oppose the commencement of the war in the Gulf." But for the most part, that was an atypical reaction. Most of course, as I said, was supportive of the president and the fighting people in the Persian Gulf. Now, the Congress is going to be called back into full session. You're going to start seeing most of the members coming into town tomorrow. What will probably happen is that by the end of the week, there will be a full, complete resolution in support of the effort there. But for the most part, while Congress will be meeting, there's very little that Congress has to do now. The role of Congress, for the most part, will be to stand on the sidelines. Susan?
Thank you, CNN's Bob Franken, keeping us up to date from Capitol Hill. Let's go back now to Baghdad. CNN's John Holliman is standing by. John, what's the latest there?
Well, all right, let me do this. I will make a dub of the tape here and give one of the tapes to Iraqi TV and ask them to feed it for us.
Atlanta, Baghdad.
John Holliman in Baghdad. We're having a little discussion here with a representative of Iraqi television at this moment, who's allowed us the opportunity to send to you some of the pictures that we made overnight of this attack on Baghdad. In the background, you can hear that discussion going on with our producer, Robert Weiner, and the Iraqi television officials being very cooperative, being here, and he's urging that Robert go with him to make sure that this is all right. I believe Robert Weiner will go with him to the feed, and in a matter of a few minutes, you'll probably be allowed to see some pictures of the raids on Baghdad last night. Other information that we can offer to you. There is a report today from Iraqi or the Baghdad radio saying that President Bush will regret the attack on Baghdad, and America and their allies will be taught a lesson. And there's also a report that Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has appeared on Baghdad radio, saying that the mother of all battles has now officially started, and that he'll have another address to the Iraqi people. Also, there is a radio station, probably Baghdad radio, monitored in Amman, quoting someone who sounds like President Saddam Hussein, as saying the victory is very near, in a message to the Iraqi people. On the streets of Baghdad at this moment, let me walk over to the window and give you a 30-second update on what we can see as we look out our window. There are still a few cars going back and forth. The sun is more up now. There's a gentle breeze blowing, and there is some rain in Baghdad. We saw some rainwater on the roof of a government building on one side, on the east side of our location here. And as we look out over the city, we still see the fog that is typical of the mornings in December and January in Baghdad. And we see no signs of damage at this point. We have asked Iraqi authorities to allow our CNN camera crews to go out with government officials to the streets, see if we can detect any signs of damage in the Baghdad area, and perhaps get them to take us to the places where we saw the bombs coming down 3 or 4 hours ago to get a look at what damage those bombs did cause. And because in the past few minutes, an Iraqi government official has come in to say that we have access to their television transmission facilities, we will attempt to send you the pictures from overnight of the attack, plus whatever other pictures we get in a fairly expeditious manner. It could happen pretty soon, so we urge you to stay tuned to see those pictures as soon as we can transmit them out to you. John Holliman, CNN Live in Baghdad.
John, a two-part question, please, in reference to Baghdad Radio's report from Saddam Hussein. Has anybody actually seen Saddam Hussein since all of this started? And is there any way to actually confirm when he made that message?
Short answer to both questions, Susan, no and no. We still don't have any power. There is no electricity available anywhere in Baghdad. We have a generator, but we haven't yet been able to fire it up so that we could look at Baghdad television. Our monitor for Baghdad radio is available here, but none of us speaks Arabic, so we're sort of at a loss. But we're going to try to get an Arabic speaker into our workspace soon and crank up Baghdad radio and continue to sort of get a hint, perhaps, from the broadcast as to where President Saddam Hussein is right now and when the announcement that we've heard about was, in fact, recorded. So we'll let you know the answers to those questions as soon as we get them.
All right. Thank you, CNN's John Holliman, keeping us up to date from Baghdad. Patrick.
As we heard from John Holliman, we will keep you updated on any video that we get and that we're allowed to transmit out of Baghdad back here to Atlanta so we can show you. We do have some other video right here. This is Jerusalem Live, some 5.5 hours or 6 hours. That's the Knesset right there in Jerusalem, some 5.5 to 6 hours after what is being described as a massive airstrike by Saudi Arabian, U.S., Great Britain, and Kuwaiti air forces. Amman, Jordan right here again. As you can see, the sun just coming up there in Amman, Jordan. Again, we're awaiting the first pictures from Baghdad on the massive airstrikes. Right now, let's go to the State Department, where World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter is standing by live. Ralph?
Patrick, here at the State Department, a final round of diplomacy in the hours before the attack began amounted to little more than a series of brief meetings and telephone calls by Secretary of State James Baker, notifying key American allies and friends of the impending attack. Baker telephoned Soviet Foreign Minister Alexander Besmirtnik in Moscow and met with Israel's ambassador to Washington. The notifications began about 10 hours before the attack when Baker met with the Saudi ambassador who telephoned King Fahd with the word from the State Department. As night approached in the Gulf, Baker and President Bush had a pleasant lunch at the White House when the two men presumably exchanged final thoughts about their decision to use force before completing the notification process through diplomatic channels. The reaction, according to a Baker aide, most diplomats offered the United States good luck. Ralph Begleiter, CNN, reporting live from the State Department.
Ralph Begleiter, thank you very much. And right now we're going to go to Jeanne Moos, who's standing by live at the United Nations in New York. Jeanne?
Patrick, the Secretary General of the United Nations just went into the room where members of the 15 members of the Security Council are gathering. The 5 permanent members, the U.S., Britain, Soviet Union, France, and China, just had a private meeting of their own, and now they are going back into the room with the rest of the members. We're expecting the U.S. ambassador to give a general briefing to the members of the Council, not a detailed report, but a kind of general briefing on what the U.S. is doing. The President of the United States, President Bush, called the Secretary General of the UN before the hostilities started. U.S. officials say that the President indicated that the time for diplomacy had ended and it was time for Resolution 678, the resolution authorizing the use of force. It was time for that to be implemented. Here's how the Secretary General responded to the news of the attack.
After all my efforts, after all the efforts of so many countries and so many personalities, that we are now facing a war. And then at this very moment, only 1 hour and a half after the facilities, I am not well informed. I have not a lot of details about what has happened. But I think it's for me to express my deep sorrow because of as Secretary General of the United Nations, a peace organization, I can only be saddened by the beginning of hostilities.
And as for what the Security Council will be doing, well, there is not a lot the Security Council can do. After all, it authorized this action that the United States took tonight. And so it's not the usual kind of situation where when there's some sort of military action, their countries would come and complain to the Council and ask for action. That will not be the case in this case. Now, outside the United Nations, there are demonstrations tonight, and Gary Tuckman is outside for CNN.
Well, Jeanne, most of New York City has been quiet and subdued today, but that's anything but the case across the street from the United Nations. There are literally hundreds of people surrounding us, demonstrators, counter-demonstrators, and policemen. And behind us right now, they have just set a fire in the street across the street from the United Nations. The fire was originally set as a little bonfire, but it seems to be growing out of control right now, and police officials are rushing to the scene. This is an anti-war demonstration. It started kind of impromptu, and it was a very dangerous time for a while because police tried to keep demonstrators on streets where there were no cars. But they ended up going on 2nd Avenue where there were lots of cars. So there were literally hundreds of people walking down 2nd Avenue with cars. I actually saw one lady get hit by a car as she was crossing the street. Someone had to carry her away. So it was a very dangerous situation here today. And what they're telling us right now outside the United Nations, these organizers of this anti-war demonstration, is they plan to do it again tomorrow night.
Please step back from the fire.
And that is the situation outside the UN tonight. U.S. officials have told CNN that the Security Council will have an important role to play when it comes to making peace, but for the moment, there's not a lot, as I said, that the Security Council can do. And as for Iraqi reaction to all of this, well, we have been looking for the Iraqi ambassador to the UN. He is nowhere to be found. We did send a CNN correspondent over to the Iraqi mission to the United Nations to see if he was over there. Someone there just shut the window on the CNN correspondent when he went over there to find the Iraqi ambassador. Shut the window, said no, no, no. And so no reaction here so far from the Iraqis at the UN. I'm Jeanne Moos reporting live from the United Nations.
Thank you, Jeanne. And just to reiterate, British Prime Minister John Major will be holding a news conference just a little bit over 1 hour from now. CNN will, of course, carry that news conference live. But right now, we go to CNN's Doug James, who is standing by in Amman, Jordan. Doug, what's the latest from your angle?
Here in Jordan, in one way at least, the day began like any other day with prayers at the mosques. Of course, this was no ordinary day. Most people heading to the mosques had already heard on their radio of the beginning of the Gulf War. Now, so far, there's been no official reaction from the government. We understand that King Hussein has been watching developments on CNN, as many world leaders have, and he is expected to make some kind of an announcement, perhaps on television, later this morning. Jordan has already taken precautions. Its airspace has been closed. It was closed about an hour before the attack, indicating that perhaps Jordan got some kind of indication that the attack was about to begin. Its 100,000 man armed forces are on the highest of alert, and some reservists have been called up. The fear here, of course, has always been that Jordan somehow would be brought into the war, that Iraq might attack Israel, Israel in return might attack Jordan. That has now been somewhat discounted with reports that the missile sites, which would have been aimed at Israel, have apparently been destroyed. The Palestinians here, of course, especially those in refugee camps, are shocked. They had hoped that Saddam Hussein could have helped them establish a homeland to get some kind of a linkage with the whole issue of withdrawing from Kuwait. That clearly has failed. We'll see later today just how angry they are. There will be a demonstration, an angry march, a funeral really, for the 3 PLO terrorists, the PLO representatives who were killed in Tunis the other day. And the anger of the Palestinians is expected to come out at that time. American citizens here have been warned that there's no need to evacuate at this point, but they should certainly stay in their homes. This is Doug James reporting live for CNN from Amman, Jordan.
Doug, you mentioned the demonstrations planned for later today, and you bring up a very good point. In Jordan, the threat was not necessarily just a military threat, but political instability with the Palestinians in Jordan. Have you heard from King Hussein? Has he said anything to the Jordanian people? Do you expect to hear from him? And what is the Jordanian government doing to maintain political order in the kingdom?
We don't really expect any political instability here. Even the Palestinians, which form the majority of people in Jordan, have always been solidly behind King Hussein. Of course, they're going to be very disappointed that they were not able to get that linkage, the promise of a homeland. This doesn't necessarily mean that that promise has been killed for good. In fact, perhaps all the attention on the Gulf crisis will somehow bring the whole issue to the international table sometime in the future. So I don't think there'll be so much instability here as perhaps some even renewed hope in the future after the war that the whole idea of the Palestinian homeland will somehow be resurrected.
CNN's Doug James keeping us up to date from Amman, Jordan. Patrick?
As we said earlier, the attacks are over right now, and the Pentagon is in what's called the damage assessment mode right now. For the very latest on that and the latest from the Pentagon, let's go to CNN's Wolf Blitzer. Wolf?
Patrick, Pentagon officials say the U.S. air war has basically paused
to assess exactly what is going on. Officials here make clear that the U.S. is very, very pleased by the initial reports. The initial reports suggest that virtually all of the U.S. fighter aircraft, the bombers, returned safely to their bases. As we speak right now, I am told there are still no reports of any U.S. fighter aircraft lost in combat. Only a handful of Iraqi aircraft actually went up and engaged the U.S., and I am told that the U.S. fighter aircraft that were involved in this massive U.S. attack had no problem in dealing with those Iraqi aircraft. Earlier, about 2.5 hours ago, the Defense Secretary, Dick Cheney, was here in this room, and he gave us some of the details, some of his assessment of exactly what has transpired.
The operation underway tonight, taking place in the pre-dawn darkness of the Persian Gulf, involves Allied air forces of 4 nations: the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. As they undertake their missions, they do so after months of careful planning. At the direction of the President, great care has been taken to focus on military targets, to minimize U.S. casualties, and to do everything possible to avoid injury to civilians in Iraq and Kuwait. No one should doubt our ability and our resolve to carry out our mission and to achieve our objective. I have great confidence in the professionalism, the dedication, and the determination of the men and women of our armed forces. They are, without question, the finest young sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines this nation has ever sent in harm's way. I want to assure all Americans that we will do our very best to carry out the President's orders as quickly and efficiently as possible and at the lowest cost possible.
Pentagon officials say that virtually all of the fixed Iraqi Scud and other ballistic missile sites were taken out in that initial U.S. and Allied airstrike. In addition, virtually all of the Iraqi air bases were destroyed, put out of commission. There is additional information that we have here that a big chunk of the elite Republican Guard, the best Iraqi soldiers, about 150,000 of them in the northwestern section of occupied Kuwait and in southern Iraq, that the U.S. dropped some huge bombs on many of those positions, and the initial reports are that a big chunk of the Iraqi Republican Guard has been put out of commission. A word I heard earlier this evening from a senior Pentagon official who has received these initial accounts is that the Republican Guard has been decimated. The U.S. intelligence community is now sending satellites over. The U.S. intelligence community and military intelligence are going to debrief all of the American and other Allied pilots who have now returned from this massive U.S. airstrike, U.S.-led airstrike. It wasn't only the United States, Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait also participated. But by all accounts, the initial word here at the Pentagon, as far as the U.S. Is concerned, it was a very dramatic success. Patrick?
Wolf, I'm sure you heard Charles Jaco in eastern Saudi Arabia telling us that the Saudi officials are saying that initially, I mean, they're very relieved and I guess happy about the success of the airstrike so far, but obviously there's still 500,000 troops at least, or of 450,000 multinationals, and then perhaps as many as 1 million of Iraqi troops. Where does the Pentagon stand now? I mean, are they going to do more bombings at this point, or are we going to, I know Dick Cheney said earlier, the Defense Secretary, that ground forces were not going to be used or haven't been used right now, but where does it stand right now?
I am told that there is going to be an assessment made in the next few hours as the initial casualties, as in the initial account of exactly what happens reaches Washington, as all of the information reaches Washington. This pause is going to continue for some time for the U.S. to make an assessment and then decide what the next step is. The hope always has been here in the Pentagon, and this has been expressed many times privately in the weeks leading up to this war, the hope has always been that if the elite Republican Guard and the Iraqi air power, the ballistic missiles, if all of that could be, in the words of some Pentagon officials, decimated, then the Iraqi troops, the 500,000 plus Iraqi soldiers who are in and around Kuwait, that they would have no choice but to surrender, especially if the command and control facilities were cut off. They didn't have supply lines. And this is certainly what the Pentagon hopes. Earlier also in the weeks leading up to this, we had also been told that there would be a pause after the initial strike for Saddam Hussein, if he's still around, to assess what the situation is and to decide, is he now ready,
in the words of one Pentagon official, to say uncle, and he suggested Uncle Sam in this particular case. Is he now ready to evacuate, to withdraw from Kuwait, to allow the Kuwaiti government in exile to be restored? If that would be the case, I assume that the United States would stop this assault if that decision was made by Saddam Hussein. No word, of course, yet, and I don't want to leave you, our audience, with the impression that this war is by any means over. What is clear, though, is that the initial reports reaching the Pentagon describe a devastating U.S. air assault, and of course, the situation will be assessed in the hours and days to come.
Okay, Wolf Blitzer reporting live from the Pentagon. Thank you very much. Of course, we'll be checking in with you for further information throughout the night. Susan?
And as Wolf mentioned, Pentagon planners had, of course, envisioned a pause after the initial strike to give Saddam Hussein a chance to reassess his position. And this just in, the 16-member alliance of NATO has held an emergency session. The U.S. ambassador to NATO told the organization that Iraq still could avoid destruction by pulling out of Kuwait. The ambassador said it is not the U.S. installation to occupy or dismember Iraq, but to liberate Kuwait. Again, that to an emergency session of NATO. But the military offensive overnight has been described as possibly the greatest air attack in history, the largest, the strongest air attack in history. CNN's journalists in Baghdad rode out that attack. CNN's John Holliman rejoins us now live from Baghdad, where it is just after 8 o'clock in the morning there. John.
Susan, good morning. An interesting development here. At a location, I guess, less than a quarter of a mile from our CNN Baghdad bureau, there is a huge cloud of white smoke that is pouring out of the side of a building. We don't know whether it is being manufactured intentionally or whether there's something on fire in this building, but the smoke is coming out in such volume that it has totally obscured our view of the outside world in a very short period of time. It would lead one to believe that perhaps the Iraqis have manufactured this smoke. We don't know anything else about it except that we see the source that it's coming from, and that has made it very, very difficult to see even out our windows here at the hotel. It's thicker than the thickest fog we have seen in the early morning hours in Baghdad. A couple of other notes for you. The Pentagon says the Iraqi Air Force has been decimated. The elite Republican Guard, the best Iraqi soldiers, the ones sent to defend Kuwait, have been destroyed. The Iraqis have a different view of that situation. Baghdad Radio quotes Iraqi officials as saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, in an address to the Iraqi people and the Arab nations, says, the mother of all wars has started, and the victory is very near. Iraqi television in the recent past has invited CNN to transmit all the pictures of the attack we made last night to you. We will begin doing that within a matter of minutes if we can work out the technical details and if Iraqi television is able to operate and has electricity and all the facilities that they normally have when we send pictures to you. And you'll remember if you were watching our broadcast earlier in the evening in the United States, or 3 or 4 hours ago, wherever you were, the descriptions that we offered you over the telephone line here about how remarkable it was. We have a guest who was here during the bombing of Baghdad last night, who was also in Tripoli, Libya, in the Libyan bombing in April 1986. She's Marie Colvin, the Middle East correspondent for the Sunday Times. Marie, first of all, now tell me what happened to you last night.
10 minutes after. You had what looked like some massive battle out there last night, lowing and starting all over again over a period of about 2 or 3 hours. But what we could see out of our windows was massive bombing off in the distance, but not that far, maybe 5 miles along what looks to be the Baghdad airport, probably some other targets there, but they don't seem to have actually hit in the city. Whereas in Libya, they did hit targets in the city, Gaddafi's barracks, where he was living at the time, for example.
Yeah, all right, Marie. Anything else you want to tell us? How are you feeling in the aftermath of all that?
Very tired, but...
All right, well, I think there'll come a time where we'll all be able to get some sleep here. I don't know if it'll be now, because this acrid smoke that we told you about a few minutes ago at the beginning of our report is beginning to filter into the hotel. Mark Biello, this doesn't smell poisonous to you, does it? No, it smells just like some very thick smoke that's here. We'll continue our reports, Susan, and we'll keep you posted as best we can as the day continues. And we hope you'll be able to see those pictures we took last night as soon as we can get the TV station to send them to you.
Absolutely. And, John, when we are able to get that video in, we will be rejoining you and your colleagues in Baghdad, and you can give us further details from your end. CNN's Richard Roth is standing by in Tel Aviv, one of the danger points. Of course, Iraq Saddam Hussein had threatened to attack Israel. Tel Aviv was in distance of a possible Scud missile attack. You must be very relieved there, Richard.
Well, the sun is up here in Tel Aviv, and yes, the city is still standing, though the streets are very empty. The people of Israel have been urged by the government to stay at home. They've been ordered to open their gas maskets to keep them ready, but to stay at home and listen to the radio, and millions of them are doing it. There were some nervous moments during the early hours here of the morning after word of the attack on Baghdad came. You'd hear a car backfire and perhaps a military plane overhead, but nothing much came of it, and this city is probably breathing a large sigh of relief right now. Here are some of the morning headlines of the papers that are just coming out. This is Israel's largest daily, saying U.S. planes attack Iraqi missiles, and then the second largest paper in Israel, Ma'ariv, saying war. And those papers are coming out on the streets right now, and those people who would like to leave their homes are probably going to snatch them up pretty quickly. Now, Israel ordered all of the people to stay at home, declaring a civil defense emergency. As part of that emergency, the citizens were told to open their gas mask kits. Millions have been distributed to the people over the last few weeks. And just yesterday, the army started handing them out to Palestinians in the West Bank. That after an order by the Supreme Court, which called the government policy scandalous not to give them out to the Palestinians. The army was worried about trouble in the occupied territories by supporters of Saddam Hussein, and that people would be able to use the gas mask to ward off tear gas from the army. And in fact, the army has clamped down in the territories, perhaps just in case. They have placed a curfew on the occupied territories and in communities in East Jerusalem. And Israeli radio is reporting this morning that 3 shots were fired at the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem from a passing car. We don't have any other details at this moment. Now, an Israeli defense official says that Israel is not involved in any way in this conflict. An army official said the chances of a missile attack from Iraq are getting smaller and smaller as time passes. Right now, it's, quote, small and near zero. Of course, Tel Aviv, as you mentioned, is the city that was threatened by Saddam Hussein. In an interview with Mexican television, he said this would be the city where he would strike first should he be attacked by the multinational force. So far, all is quiet. Israel has ordered all workers in key industries to report to work today. Employees in the power, gasoline, and fire areas, and also the telephone company. There has been no significant call-up of reservists so far. Everyone is listening to the radio for the latest. Israel has always been confident that the U.S. forces would be able to do heavy damage to Saddam Hussein and his missile batteries. Just yesterday, a brigadier general of the Israeli Defense Force said, we are absolutely confident in the capabilities of the American forces. And he said that Israel was sure they would do the job. Now, also what's taking place in Tel Aviv, the chief of staff of the Israeli military has called his general staff in, and we've seen soldiers in the streets carrying their brown gas mask boxes, and they've been reporting to their posts. We talked to people at various bars and all-night kiosks that have been open in Tel Aviv. General reaction has been certainly very favorable to what's happened. One woman said she was worried. 2 other men said that they were glad that it appears that it might be a short war. They were basing that on radio reports of the heavy damage inflicted by U.S. aircraft. An Israeli security official said that missiles pointed at Israel, some of them have been destroyed in the raid. That according to Israeli television. And the assistant to the military chief of operations says we know of some hits on missile batteries in the western part of Iraq. Despite the calm here so far, though, Israel says it is still ready for anything. Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
And as Richard reported, Israeli officials are now saying that the chance of a missile strike is getting smaller and smaller. This is CNN's Wolf Blitzer is reporting from Pentagon officials that the U.S.-led forces have virtually decimated the Iraqi missile capability. Patrick?
And joining us now to add his expertise to the military attack against Iraq is Major General Perry Smith. General Smith is a retired 2-star Air Force general who commanded an F-15 wing in Europe. He's also the author of 2 books, Assignment Pentagon and Taking Charge. Welcome, General Smith, to you. Just heard that report from Susan and Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon. By all accounts, at least from the Pentagon, this airstrike was massive. It was very, very effective, wiped out Some reports are saying the Iraqi Air Force, also the Republican Guard. We just heard the missile installations. Do you think that the strength of the Iraqi air defenses was overestimated, or was the Allied forces' capability of doing this kind of massive damage sort of underestimated?
I think probably a combination of both. Our capability was very, very good, and of course we came in low. We had a lot of electronic warfare to jam their radars. We used a lot of good new tactics and techniques. Our training was very good, and we kind of overwhelmed the system. And then as more and more waves came through, it was easier and easier for them to come in. So the raid was quite successful, well planned, and well executed. I think it's a little premature to say that the Iraqi Air Force is completely wiped out yet. They may well be in their shelters, and we may see them sometime in the next day or two.
Are you surprised, though, by the kind of reports that we're having decimated in this massive attack? I mean,
I'm not really surprised because we had so much time to practice. We have such good systems, and we have such a massive amount of air. I guess if there is a surprise, that the fact that we have, apparently have not lost any aircraft. I would think that operational losses, some kind of losses would be expected. And so as we look forward for the next few days, we shouldn't get too optimistic, because we will probably lose some airplanes, because warfare is very hazardous, and the adrenaline is pumping pretty heavily in those cockpits right now.
Give us some idea, if you would. I mean, we've heard these incredible reports from our 3 reporters in Baghdad who were sitting in the hotel watching these incredible airstrikes all around Baghdad and surrounding areas. Give us some idea strategically what happened. Did the stealth bombers go in? I mean, what actually do you think was used, and how was it used?
I'm going to have to guess in this because I don't have any detailed information, but my guess would be we used the stealth aircraft initially to go in after the radars, to knock out the radars, and then followed in with F-15Es, which are the air-to-ground Es, air-to-ground F-15s. They come in very low. They come in with very sophisticated radar, very precise weapons, and they hit the military targets. And then wave after wave of F-15Es and perhaps some other low-level attack aircraft throughout the night.
Now, did they come off of just ground bases, or were they coming off of carriers? I mean, we do know there's some reports that they apparently left from Saudi Arabia.
It appears that the great majority of the missions were coming out of Saudi Arabia. There may have been some out of carriers, but probably not. I would guess that most of these came out of Saudi Arabia. The F-15s would fly off the ground. The F-117 stealth fighters would have come off the ground. The F-111s off the ground. So I would think it was largely a Air Force operation at least against Baghdad.
We're in, as we heard from Wolf Blitzer also at the Pentagon, we're in sort of a damage assessment at this point, in some sort of a pause mode. If another bombing attack were ordered by the Pentagon or requested by the Pentagon, what would they do next?
Well, again, they would look and see what they did and what they didn't do. They go after targets that they had hoped to hit well and didn't hit so well. They would probably begin to shift toward Kuwait and think in terms of isolating the Iraqi forces inside Kuwait from resupply from Iraq. But it would be an evolving kind of campaign, a little hard to predict at this moment.
But how important would the air power be in terms of if, let's say, in the worst-case scenario, the ground forces were needed? Obviously, a lot of people in the Pentagon are thinking if that is needed, they don't like it only to be a mopping-up kind of operation as opposed to a real offensive push into Kuwait.
This is a very important point. We see a major doctrinal shift here, and that is in all times in history when we had massed armies facing each other with air power was always in support of the massed army. Now we have the air forces in the lead, perhaps even decisively in the lead, with the Army and ground forces more in a supporting role. The situation is ideal. You've got a desert situation, you've got plenty of time for training, you've got a very massive amount of air power. But it may be a unique time in history where in a tactical situation, air power would be the decisive element.
Well, as you well know, General, during Vietnam, the bombing of Hanoi, I guess in 1972, was at the end of the war, and our colleague Peter Arnett was mentioning this earlier tonight as he was describing the bombing around Baghdad, but that happened at the end of the war. At the beginning of the war, we've had these massive airstrikes, so as you're saying, historically, it could turn out to be that this was a really sort of almost a preemptive bombing to stop the war immediately.
Well, we came out of Vietnam with a lot of lessons, and we realized we needed better training, we needed better technology, we needed better systems, we needed more accuracy, we needed better cooperation among the services, and all that has taken gradually hold. And I think The result is that the United States military today is pretty darn effective, and what we see in this, at least this first night of combat, really impressive operation.
So really the targets were sort of, the maps were sort of computerized into the cockpit of the
Yeah, if you get inside the F-15E, you see a very computerized cockpit. Two people, one in the back who does the controlling of all the radars, and the front seater who takes care of the flying the airplane. And they have a map in front of them, which is highlights the route in and also the specific target they're going after. And as a result, you get accuracies down to less than a foot in many cases. And they come in low, they're using jamming and so forth, so it's very hard to hit them as they go through.
Well, let me just ask you, as we're talking about, you know, sort of a first time in history that we've gone in with the Air Force first. Let's assume that Saddam Hussein did want to surrender or capitulate at this point. How would he do that in an air war, so to speak? I mean, rather than ground forces just saying we surrender.
Well, I think a couple of ways. I think he'd first try to make contact with us, and I think the second thing was he'd start withdrawal of his troops from Kuwait to show that he's really sincere about some kind of a move out. So he'd have to not only make a statement, but he'd have to make some movements out of Kuwait.
Major General Perry Smith, thank you very much for your expertise and your appraisal. Certainly we don't know until we see all the video and the damage assessment is in, but thank you very much. Susan?
And we hope to get the first sights of war in the Gulf from the Pentagon pool in any time now. CNN's Jennifer Michael recaps some of the sounds as Baghdad came under Allied fire. The sounds of war. A direct communication line from Baghdad picks up some of the blasts from the U.S.-led attack on Iraq, as Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. From his vantage point at the El Rashid Hotel, CNN's Bernard Shaw described the first frightening moments of the air assault.
Just one comment. Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like we're in the center of hell.
Privately, Pentagon sources described the initial airstrike on Iraq and occupied Kuwait as a blowout.
The airstrike was massive, was devastating, and indeed those reports appear to be very, very impressive as far as the United States is concerned. Iraq's air bases, and there are probably about 100 Iraqi air bases, almost all of them appear to have been destroyed, according to Pentagon officials, who tell CNN that those air bases were pinpointed by the F-15s, the F-16s, A-6 carrier-based aircraft that came into Saudi Arabia, landed at forward bases, and then took off and returned to those bases in Saudi Arabia. The Iraqi Air Force, except for a few notable exceptions, didn't even come up to challenge the invading U.S. fighters. It was an extremely impressive U.S. airstrike.
Publicly, the top Pentagon officials were more cautious in reporting on the success of the attack, conducted by hundreds of U.S., British, Saudi, and Kuwaiti aircraft.
So far, there has been no air resistance.
Can you tell us if there's been any casualties so far?
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging.
Strategic Iraqi sites were the targets of this first assault on Saddam Hussein's military machine. In his formal announcement of war, President Bush described the reasons for the assault, its goals, and its targets.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal.
Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirms Saddam Hussein has not made good on his threat to lash back at Israel.
We have made the preparations for our population. We've asked them to take certain precautions, asked the people to stay in their homes for the moment. So we have not relaxed our state of alert, but we follow things, as I said, very closely and wish the American and other forces full success.
Senior White House officials say the air attacks now underway will continue virtually nonstop.
One U.S. official tells CNN massive bombings could continue from 7 to 10 days. Jennifer Michael, CNN, reporting.
Once again, we're going to go back to Baghdad Live, where John Holliman and his two other colleagues, Peter Arnett and Bernard Shaw, have been for the last 10 hours or 12 hours that this thing has been going on. And let's check in with John right now for the very latest. John?
Patrick, good morning to you. I trust it's morning where you are. I think it is. Here in Baghdad, it's about 8:30 in the morning right now, and there are buses and people going back and forth to work in taxi cabs on the streets. Out my window, I can see that there's still the early morning Baghdad fog. I'm going to open the window and look out and maybe let you listen to what I can hear, which is just a little traffic noise outside. The unknown soldiers' tomb memorial here in downtown Baghdad is visible to us now. Doesn't appear to be damaged. The government housing complex seems to be in good shape. In fact, we see from our vantage point in the center of the central city no signs of any damage from the terrific, devastating attack which occurred just a few hours ago. As I look around, I see people are going about their business now on the streets. I don't see anybody walking the streets, and there may be some concern in the minds of some people that it's still not safe. After that attack overnight in the hours of darkness, there might be some people still concerned that the attack could be continued in the daylight. There's a low cloud cover over the city, broken in some places, and there's some birds flying up in the vicinity of the sun, which is over in the east. I can see flags waving on the Iraqi National Parade ground. That's what it looks like. I'll tell you what we're hearing from official sources here. From the Iraqi media, from Baghdad radio, Iraqi officials are saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, in an address to the Iraqi people and the Arab nation, says, "The mother of all wars has started. The victory is very near." And as we told you about a few minutes ago, Patrick, we've gotten permission from Iraqi television to send you some pictures, but it appears from what we can tell, Iraqi television has no ability to transmit pictures right now. We're attempting to work with them to get those pictures to you as soon as we can, and we'll let you know when we know more about the timetable for releasing them. At any rate, here in Baghdad, things at our hotel are coming back to normal. We're attempting to...
John, excuse me just for a second if I can. John, just a sec. We're looking at some pool video. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but we are looking for some pool video that was apparently shot before the attacks earlier yesterday. This is pool video of an Air Force base in Saudi Arabia, apparently, seeing some of the planes being readied for the attack that...
As the president ordered the attack on Baghdad, some of the Pentagon planners and the military analysts said that a sweep mission into Iraq or Kuwait would probably be led by an F-15 squadron.
A message from President Saddam Hussein at 8:30,
and
it'll be visible in Jordan. And we need a translator.
I'm sorry, John. We were stepping all over each other. What did you say? Repeat that.
I'm sorry, Susan. I was giving our whole network, as well as our viewers, a message that the Iraqi television authorities have just told CNN they will be transmitting a message from President Saddam Hussein in just a couple of minutes. I believe 8:30 is just a couple of minutes from now. So we don't know whether they'll have the facility to do that. We hope they will, and we just wanted to alert those of the technical people along the CNN network line who have to do things for us to present those pictures to you, that we'll need a translator to translate the president's words into English, and we'll need some technical work done so that we'll be able to see and hear President Saddam Hussein, but it might be coming up pretty soon.
All right. Thank you, John. We will, of course, endeavor to get that to you live, translated as quickly as possible, of course. The F-15 squadrons are supposed to be a very important part of the U.S.-led effort in an attack on Iraq or Kuwait. For example, 4 F-15s would dart ahead of a bomb-laden attack plane trying to perhaps open a furrow in the sky by shooting any Iraqi resistance. Again, there apparently was little or no Iraqi resistance. Patrick?
Again, that was pool video. We are awaiting our video from Baghdad, as we heard from John Holliman. John Sweeney is in Riyadh. He's live right now with the very latest from there. John, I'm not sure if you can see this pool video, but we see a pilot in an Air Force jet, obviously shot prior to the attacks into Kuwait and into Iraq.
Indeed, that's what you're seeing, the very first pictures of, these are F-15 Strike Eagle aircraft, the United States best fighter. It can be heavily armed, and indeed, these planes, we're here from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, originally in North Carolina. They took off at around 12:45 a.m. Saudi time. That's about 17 hours after the UN deadline. And this is the first wave of aircraft being prepared for takeoff. These particular Strike Eagle planes carry a two-man crew, a pilot and a navigator and a bomber who flies in the rear. The ground crews loaded many of the planes with a dozen half-ton cluster bombs and 4 air-to-air heat-seeking missiles. The F-15 Strike Eagle is the newest version of the F-15, equipped with infrared night vision system. And obviously, as they led the attack, they were quite successful with that night vision. They encountered, as we now know, very little Iraqi air resistance over Kuwait and Iraq. They were perhaps even more successful than anyone thought. And they indeed, as we have heard, apparently decimated the Iraqi Air Force. As we've heard from the Pentagon and Wolf Blitzer, 100 Air Force bases apparently destroyed. Many of those, however, were attacked by carrier-based aircraft, as we understand. The F-14 Tomcat is a very similar plane to this F-15 that we're looking at here, being prepared by the ground crews in the largest air base in Saudi Arabia, which we're still not allowed to identify. It seems to be remarkably calm as these people are preparing for what is one of the most momentous occasions, really, in U.S. military history. Perhaps that's a tribute to the professionalism of the crews involved and the fact that they've been training here for the past 5 months. I would say that this is probably the best trained military contingent that the United States has ever sent into war, because they've been here so long practicing on site. Again, this is the United States' most lethal air weapon, the F-15 Strike Eagle, being prepared for takeoff. Again, these planes originally came from Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina.
Again, we have been listening to CNN's John Sweeney, who is reporting to us from Saudi Arabia. We are looking at Pentagon pool video of F-15 Eagles as they are about to be deployed from Saudi Arabia. John, once the F-15s were aloft, how long would it take them to get from Saudi Arabia to Baghdad?
I couldn't give you the exact time, but these planes, it wouldn't take very long. I'm sorry I can't give you a more specific answer, but it wouldn't take very long. We've been watching these planes for several months over here, and they have a booster thruster in the back, and many of the pilots were telling us some months ago, before the war started, that they enjoyed flying in Saudi Arabia, especially because this booster that they use utilizes an awful lot of fuel, and in the United States they weren't always allowed to use that, but here they had the great access to fuel, so these pilots who love to fly anyway would usually hit this booster thruster. I hope I'm describing it correctly, and would see this long tail of flame shooting out of these planes, and all of a sudden it would shoot into the sky as faster than you could imagine.
John, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Patrick.
John, where the Saudi Arabia also has the same aircraft, did they fly out of this, we're looking at pool video as we continue to look at this, Where did the Saudis fly out of? Do you know if they were involved in this particular video we're seeing here?
Yeah, the Saudis fly out of the same air base, and during their practice training missions, frequently they would fly together, as they did indeed on the real thing.
John, thank you very much. John Sweeney reporting to us from Saudi Arabia as we continue to look at unedited Pentagon pool video of the F-15 Eagles being prepared for battle in Saudi Arabia. One of the people that rode out the attack of Baghdad is CNN's John Holliman. He rejoins us now. While it is apparently not Pentagon pool video, it is U.S. news media pool video. John Holliman is rejoining us now from Baghdad. John.
Hi again, Susan. It's kind of a confusing situation now, I'm sure, as the Pentagon and perhaps even the Iraqis will let us all send our pictures in to CNN, and our viewers will just get a montage of views of this war from both sides of the lines. At least that's what we hope and trust. Iraqi television has just told us they will attempt to feed the world and CNN a message from President Saddam Hussein in the next few minutes. So far, we are told that there are two ways to get pictures and sounds out of Iraq to the rest of the world. The normal ways to do it are a path that goes over land and a path that goes through a satellite. And the people at the receiving end of both of those paths say they're not receiving anything from Iraq right now. We hope that problem will be solved soon and that we'll be able to see those pictures of the message from President Saddam Hussein, plus CNN's video, which we shot during the attack. We're told that the head of Iraqi television will have to look at our pictures before we're allowed to send them out to you and the rest of the world. We don't know how long that process will take because we do have several different sets of pictures to show you. But at any rate, we hope that'll be coming up pretty soon as technical problems at Iraqi TV can be solved. One more thing. We had been told, we had expected before what happened last night happened, that Iraqi television would be a target of the coalition forces. It turned out it was not. There's no damage to the TV station, according to CNN's Chris Chrismanich, who was just there. They don't have telephone service, nor does anyone in Baghdad, as far as we know. And there's still no electricity available anywhere else in the city, but Iraqi television has generators, so they are up and running. That's the latest and the newest information I have. Susan?
All right. Thank you, CNN's John Holliman, keeping us up to date from Baghdad. Patrick?
Right now we're going to go to CNN's Mitch Leopard, who's standing by in London, and there people are anticipating the address by the new British Prime Minister. Mitch, what's the latest?
Well, Patrick, it was just before midnight London time when Operation Desert Storm began. The Ministry of Defense here did confirm that British forces were involved in the initial attacks. Britain has 35,000 troops in the Gulf, as well as 60 aircraft in the Naval Armada. It is the second largest military force behind the United States. Despite the late hour at Trafalgar Square in London, late shift workers were converging to take the all-night buses home, and there was much reaction.
I think that war was inevitable, but I'm really sad that it started. Now that it has, I just hope it's over as quickly as possible and as few lives are lost as possible.
I'm just majorly shocked. I'm just worried for the people who are out there, especially all so I've got several mates on aircraft carrier. A guy I know, really close friend back home, is on an aircraft carrier, and it's majorly worrying for him.
The fact that Britain is playing such an important part in the war poses great problems for us, people who live in London, after the war is finished, because I think this city will become a target for terrorism for years to come.
Not far away in Whitehall, government offices had extra security. There you find offices for the Ministry of Defense, Foreign Office, offices where all coordination for emergency medical services for injured troops take place, and of course, number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's residence. John Major spoke with President Bush before the attack, and just after, protesters in front of Downing Street were against American and British forces in the Gulf.
This is the seat of the Tory government. This is where the people who made the decision to massacre innocent Iraqis are actually to be found, and therefore this is where we find our enemy, and we'll come and demonstrate against them.
As has often been the case, CNN's worldwide reach showed President Bush addressing Americans. Only this time, his audience included night owls at an all-night coffee shop in London's West End.
While the world waited, while the world talked peace and withdrawal, Saddam Hussein dug in and moved massive forces into Kuwait.
It is now 5:42 in the morning London time. Prime Minister Major will have comments for the United Kingdom and the news media in about 2 hours. He is expected to outline Britain's strategic involvement in Operation Desert Storm.
You want me to ask
Leopard, CNN reporting live in London.
Mitch, we are going to hear from the Prime Minister here in the next hour or so, as you just said. What else can we expect to hear from other European community members, and particularly France, that obviously has gone along with what did happen in the last 12 hours? What can we expect to hear from other members?
Well, the Prime Minister, we expect to hear what we've heard all along, that they take a view about this engagement that is very similar to the United States. Of course, as we've already heard, the envoys of the 16 NATO nations have been meeting in emergency session in Brussels since the outbreak of the war, and also later this afternoon in about 12 hours, the foreign ministers of the 12 European countries will be meeting in emergency session, ironically, in Paris. So we may find out a little bit more about what the French think.
So the reaction from the piece that we just saw that you did there, Mitch, the reaction in Britain, how would you say they're reacting to, the people generally are reacting to what has gone on in the last 12 hours?
Well, it is quite mixed, as we expected. We toured around town and got quite a few young people who do work late-night shifts. We found people going home from evening plays in downtown London's West End, and we have been getting some, even though it was late and many people were already in bed. They will soon find out, probably in the next hour or two. But we have some political reaction. Chancellor Cole
Mitch
is
Leopard,
thinking of the possibility
we have some more
of
pool
casualties.
tape here. Mitch Leopard, excuse me for interrupting, but again, here we have some U.S. pool. This is shot by the media. This is pool video that was shot presumably in Saudi Arabia. This can't obviously tell what kind of an attack plane or bomber that was, but we're going to bring in Wolf Blitzer, who's at the Pentagon right now, has been throughout the evening and the early morning. Wolf Blitzer, can you fill us in on what we're seeing here?
This looks like some of the first U.S. fighter aircraft returning to the U.S. air bases in Saudi Arabia. This looks like an F-15 that obviously returned at night. Clearly, the U.S. Air Force and the Navy wanted to undertake all of these airstrikes at night. We're told that F-117A stealth fighters, the radar-evading fighters, were very much involved in knocking out some of the major Iraqi strategic sites, the chemical weapons facilities, the Scud ballistic bases. We're told that most of the Iraqi Air Force, all of the major air bases, appear to have been destroyed. Pentagon officials are obviously very pleased by the work by these fighter aircraft. Here is an F-15 returning to an air base in Saudi Arabia. Technically, these are Saudi air bases. This was a joint operation between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Great Britain, the four countries that participated in so far what is still an air war. Here are some of the ground crew awaiting the return of the first U.S. fighter aircraft sent into Iraq and occupied Kuwait to go after several of the most important Iraqi strategic targets. Clearly, these guys are pleased. Even as we speak right now, the Pentagon has received no indication that any of the hundreds of U.S. and Allied fighter aircraft involved in this strike, that any of them were damaged or destroyed. We're told, at least as of now, these are initial reports, that they appear to have returned safely to their bases in Saudi Arabia. Here are some more planes returning from the first wave of U.S. airstrikes at Saudi Arabia. Still dark in Saudi Arabia. This is the first videotape that the Pentagon pool has released to the American news media. Clearly there is a great sense of relief, at least based on these initial reports. And we're going to get more information, of course, during the daylight hours as the intelligence and satellite reconnaissance photography goes over and assesses all of the damage from these massive bombing runs. Here comes another U.S. fighter aircraft returning to a base in Saudi Arabia from its mission in Iraq. seems to be taking, you know, is it landing? That seems to be taking off and going. This videotape obviously was taken earlier this evening as the United States undertook this massive operation codenamed Desert Storm. Interestingly enough, Storm probably came from Storm and Norman. General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Shield. Here's looks like a ground crew person, but we can't hear exactly what he's saying. This is Wolf Blitzer reporting live from the Pentagon. Now back to you, Patrick, in Atlanta.
Again, what we're watching here is U.S. pool tape, and there is an interview, as you can see, but the audio, we don't have any control over that. That has been fed in. We do not hear what exactly he was saying, but again, that was U.S. pool video, presumably of the fighters returning from their mission into Iraq and into Kuwait. Susan?
Again, we also need to point out that we expect to hear an address from Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television. We don't know when this will be, but CNN's crews in Baghdad have been told to expect an address from Saddam Hussein to the Iraqi people on television, quote, momentarily. Now, we should point out that we don't know when that address was taped. We will, of course, attempt to bring it to you live or as soon as possible. We also plan to broadcast our own video shot by CNN crews that weathered the artillery, the storm, last night in Baghdad. We will bring that to you live, unedited, as soon as it is fed into CNN's headquarters here in Atlanta. Meantime, in the United States, members of Congress were quick to react to the beginning of war against Iraq. Most expressed hope that the conflict ends quickly with a minimum number of casualties. Some lawmakers also praise what they consider the apparent U.S. upper hand in the assault.
The difference between it was another gentleman, the difference between the UN and Allied forces and the Iraqi is that the field commanders have appropriate ability to give appropriate orders in our particular procedures, and the Iraqis take their order from a single point, and they apparently blew out the command and control centers at each location. That, I would think, is what must have occurred, because they did not seem to respond, at least the Iraqi air arm did not seem to respond, which I would think would possibly mean that many of them were taken out on the ground.
Even if the Air Forces don't do it entirely themselves, they may do 90% of it or 80% of it, in which case then the ground force operation would be fairly simple. But I would be very surprised. I'm still skeptical. I mean, put me down as skeptical. I think that you're going to need a ground attack, that this thing is going to be weeks, not days, that we're still going to need, we're going to have some casualties here. In other words, don't let this optimism here, don't let it carry you away.
One California congressman was outraged by the war effort, but most were supportive. By the end of the week, Congress is expected to have a resolution supporting the president's action.
Cuban President Fidel Castro says the attack on Iraq could have been avoided. Mr. Castro was giving a news conference when he found out that the multinational force had attacked Iraq. He says, quote, "It's an unnecessary war. Anything can happen there, even an ecological catastrophe." Castro says the U.S., quote, was bent on war when a peaceful solution could have been found, unquote.
My feelings are that of shock and horror that is felt by all, and which the entire world must be feeling. Feelings of a great sorrow, a great awareness of what war is and can mean, the loss of human life, and the great material destruction. I think also of the terrible consequences that it will have on the world economy, especially for the countries of the third world, and of the potential dangers that exist within that war that should never have been unleashed, and which, as I said before, was unnecessary for obtaining the objectives that they wanted in the UN.
And the Cuban leader went on to say that he has a feeling of pain, of very deep bitterness. He says the mentality of the Arab countries was... This, again, is U.S. pool tape. As you can see, people preparing, servicemen preparing with their chemical weapons, their gas masks. In preparation, there were a number of warnings in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere throughout the Middle East that of concern of an impending, perhaps retaliatory attack by Scud missiles from Iraq, but again, those have not been confirmed. Apparently, the Scud missiles did not leave Iraq and hit anywhere else. But as you can see, U.S. service personnel getting ready for a possible chemical attack. This was taken earlier. Again, this is U.S. pool video. Obviously, after the massive airstrikes, things have calmed down significantly, and we would presume that people are not in this mode where they would be wearing their chemical weapons apparatus. Again, we presume this was shot prior to the airstrikes into Iraq and Kuwait by the four nations involved, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Great Britain.
Everywhere it said right here. Okay, take off the lid and tighten it shut. And this is right here on the bottom. Oh, this is my mouth. Look at that. There it is. There you go, everybody.
Again, what we're seeing are U.S. personnel equipping themselves with anti-chemical weapons gear, as you can see, including gas masks. This was shot earlier by the U.S. pool, a video that we have just received here at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
The American-led forces, of course, was very concerned about the possibility that Iraq would use chemical weapons. One commander saying that he was forced to assume that Iraq would attack American troops with a range of biological and chemical weapons which can be deadly. They are not necessarily deadly. During the 8-year Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein reportedly used chemical weapons during that war. Among the casualties, only about 10% were estimated to be from chemical weapons. But of course, the United States has established that Iraq has manufactured and used chemical weapons both during the Iran-Iraq war and also against Iraq's own Kurdish population.
Wolf Blitzer is joining us once again live at the Pentagon. Wolf, as you can see, this latest U.S. pool video, you want to fill us in on what we're seeing?
Well, I got a small monitor here, Patrick, but it looks like obviously a military vehicle at an air base someplace in Saudi Arabia. And according to the Pentagon ground rules, we're not allowed to say where these air bases are located for security reasons. Here comes some of the additional ground equipment. Looks like it's obviously a very huge air base.
Wolf, let me just have you reiterate something you did a little while ago, and I think it's very important that we are in a lull in terms of the bombing for damage assessment by the Pentagon, but this by no means means that there will not be any additional bombing or that the war is over or anything like that. As you said, I think we need to clarify that for our viewers.
That's absolutely correct, Patrick. The war is by no means over. What is over is the initial U.S. airstrike. We're told now that the U.S. Air Force and the Navy fighters have paused. They want to reassess exactly what has happened, take a look at all of the Iraqi damage, send the satellites over, send some other high-flying U.S. reconnaissance planes over. Now that it appears that the U.S. air power owns the skies, and as I'm saying, this appears to be the case because only a handful of Iraqi planes even took off to challenge some of these invading U.S. aircraft. The U.S. will have a relatively easy opportunity now to assess the entire damage that was inflicted by this initial U.S. airstrike. But we are told that the airstrikes have stopped for the time being. The crews have returned. We have no reports yet, and I want to stress yet, we have no reports yet of any U.S. casualties or any of the U.S. planes that may have been lost or are missing so far. That seems to be pretty much okay as far as the Pentagon is concerned. Here comes some more military vehicles over at this air base in Saudi Arabia, awaiting the return of some of the U.S. fighters that went into this pinpoint airstrike. And Pete Williams, the Pentagon spokesman, a little while ago, stopped by and told some of the journalists who are still at the Pentagon, and there are plenty of journalists here, obviously, that the U.S. has no evidence that the Iraqis managed to launch any of their Scud ballistic missiles, their ground-to-ground ballistic missiles. Some were supposedly armed with chemical warheads, but the U.S. cannot confirm that any of the Iraqi missiles were launched. The initial targets U.S. officials had always felt would be the U.S. air bases, the oil facilities in eastern Saudi Arabia, as well as Israel. We're told that the major Iraqi Scud ballistic missile sites, and there goes our feed from Saudi Arabia, we're told that the major Iraqi ballistic missile sites in the western part of Iraq, what the U.S. intelligence community has dubbed as H2 and H3, those were among the initial U.S. targets. They were destroyed, and U.S. officials tell CNN that the immediate threat to Israel clearly has been eased. Patrick?
Wolf, in terms of the reassessment and damage assessment, how long do you anticipate that would take? And if there were more bombing ordered by the Pentagon, when do you think that would take place? Would they wait again until nighttime, or would there be bombing? It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Baghdad time right now. Would there be additional bombing in daylight hours, perhaps even today?
I think that it's fair to say that this pause, Pentagon officials tell CNN that this pause has a dual purpose: to actually assess the military situation, to see exactly what the damage is as far as the Iraqis are concerned, and potentially what the U.S. and allied forces, any damage that they may have sustained. But there's also, I am told, a political message. There is a desire to see if Saddam Hussein, after this initial setback, clearly there has been a military setback to the Iraqi leadership, if after this initial setback, Saddam Hussein is prepared to announce that Iraq will withdraw its hundreds of thousands of troops from Kuwait. I am told that if the Iraqi leader, even at this late moment, were to make that kind of announcement, were to come forward and say, okay, that's it, the Iraqi forces are leaving Kuwait, the government of exile of Kuwait can be restored, the U.S. would presumably, and this is a strong word, presumably, not go back to those airstrikes. Largely, the U.S. believes that the major targets in Iraq have now been destroyed, that Iraq's chemical weapons potential, nuclear weapons potential, ballistic missile potential, and a big chunk of the Iraqi Air Force, a large chunk of the Republican Guard have effectively been destroyed. So now the word is being awaited from Saddam Hussein in Baghdad or wherever he happens to be right now.
Okay, once again, Wolf Blitzer, thank you very much for putting live from the Pentagon. Of course, he will keep us updated with the very latest developments from there. Susan?
We also should point out that we are seeing this video as you are seeing this video. We are not able to edit it. We are bringing it to you as soon as it is fed in because we feel it's important that you see it immediately. On the domestic and on the political and the diplomatic front in Belgium, NATO ministers are meeting in an emergency session to address the air attack on Iraq. And meantime, members of the UN Security Council are meeting. They were summoned to UN headquarters for urgent consultation. CNN's Jeanne Moos is standing by live at the United Nations. Jeanne, what's the latest there?
The latest is that the meeting of the UN Security Council has just broken up. The members are filing out and leaving. The U.S. ambassador apparently briefed the 15 members of the council. He did not give them a detailed description of what the United States has done. He didn't say, well, we've struck here, we've struck there. Instead, he gave a kind of general three-page statement, a political sort of statement justifying what the United States has done, saying things like our goal is not the destruction or dismemberment of Iraq, it is the liberation of Kuwait. And there was one interesting line in it that he said, the U.S. ambassador said that Iraq can still avoid further destruction by unconditional, immediate, and complete withdrawal from Kuwait. So that is some of what the U.S. ambassador told the members of the UN Security Council tonight in a meeting that has just ended. The reaction here has been somewhat predictable. The Soviet Union, for instance, has been strongly supportive of the U.S. action. On the other hand, countries like Yemen and Cuba have been critical. Yemen and Cuba were the two countries that voted against the resolution authorizing the use of force. We've put together a couple of comments made by people here. First, the Cuban ambassador, then the Kuwaiti ambassador, and the U.S. ambassador.
Maybe when war goes on, people will realize that it's very, very easy to enter into a war. The difficult thing is to get out of it.
Surely we feel very sorry for the city to be bombed, but this has been befallen on us because of the Iraqi intransigence.
Is there going to be a message for Hussein? I think the message for Hussein was just delivered.
And as I mentioned before, the council has broken up now. The council's not expected to do anything, really. After all, it was the council that authorized this action. It was the council that authorized member states to use all necessary means if Iraq did not withdraw by the 15th. And it probably comes as no surprise, but there has been no sign of the Iraqi ambassador here at the United Nations. I'm Jeanne Moos reporting live from the UN.
Jeanne Moos. Thank you, Jeanne. Wouldn't the U.S. use its veto power as a member of the Security Council, even if the Security Council at this point tried to do anything on the diplomatic front? Couldn't the U.S. just go ahead and veto it?
That's exactly what would happen. U.S. officials have told CNN that if a country, for instance Cuba or Yemen, would try to introduce some sort of measure to limit the options of the United States, the U.S. official made it clear that the U.S. would simply veto that, and there's also Britain on the council with veto power and the Soviet Union, so it looks like the U.S. will have no problems in the Security Council for now.
Thank you, CNN's Jeanne Moos reporting to you live from the United Nations as the UN Security Council meeting just broke up. Patrick.
And for the very latest developments from the White House, let's check in with CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer. Charles?
Well, there really aren't any late developments here at the White House. You know, the focus of attention has certainly shifted away from here after the president's speech this evening, his explanation of just what it is he has set in motion. Indeed, the president left the Oval Office a little while after that 9 p.m. speech. He invited evangelist Billy Graham to spend the evening at the White House. Billy Graham has been a longtime friend of President Bush's, a sometimes spiritual counselor. One of the interesting things I was told today is that while the president was up at Camp David over the Christmas holidays, he had 12 days up there during which he really pondered and put himself at peace with the moral questions of going to war with Iraq. And that while the president had always been essentially comfortable with the use of force, this was a particularly important period of time for him. Officials say that throughout the president has been determined that whenever he did take action, he was going to make it emphatic. In his speech this evening, he accused Saddam Hussein of having stalled and finally having run out of time. This is how the president put it.
Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave.
In those remarks in the Oval Office address, the president also had one message for the Iraqi people with whom he said he has no quarrel. He suggested that perhaps they could now convince, through some sort of popular voice, convince Saddam Hussein that he really ought to leave. Patrick?
Charles, let me ask you a question that we were just talking with Wolf Blitzer about at the Pentagon in terms of perhaps being not a false sense of optimism, but certainly a sense of optimism that the first phase went very well. But the White House by no means says that the war is over, there will not be additional bombings, etc.
By no means. No one says that the war is over. President Bush, as he was in the Oval Office early this evening, in fact, right at 7 o'clock our time when the bombing was due to begin, he was watching television. He was watching the reports coming from Baghdad, remarked that things were moving right on schedule. But what we don't know is precisely how long this timetable is. The president has always said it would be swift and decisive, but we also heard Secretary Cheney say that this is really just the beginning, that this could take some time. It depends on if, for that matter, if Saddam Hussein has gotten the message and is prepared to change his approach to this,
but every indication is that this could go on for days, and we have really only dealt with the air war at this point. We don't know whether there's going to be a ground war. That has not started. The president has committed heavy aerial assets, presumably in the hope that that might be enough. But you're absolutely right. No one is claiming victory. They're claiming satisfaction.
Okay, Charles Bierbauer, thank you very much, reporting live from the White House. Of course, he and his colleagues will keep us updated from there. Susan?
And CNN's colleagues in Jerusalem are standing by to keep us up to date from that angle. CNN's Linda Schertzer is here. Linda, what's the latest there?
Well, it's been a very good morning for Israel. Those were the words of Defense Minister Moshe Aarons, who appeared on Israeli television just about 40 minutes ago. It's now a little after 8 o'clock in Israel. The Israelis are waking up. They are now glued to their TV sets and radios and learning about an operation with a great sense of relief, an operation that happened while most people were fast asleep. The streets were virtually empty in the early hours of the morning in Israel as Operation Desert Storm got underway. Shortly after the news was reported here, the Army ordered all Israelis to stay inside their homes, to open up their boxes containing their gas masks, and to be prepared to use them. Sometime after the air attack started, a senior Army officer reported that some of the bases and missile launch sites that posed the greatest threat to Israel had been dealt a serious blow by Allied bombers. The news brought a great sense of relief to the Israelis, who had been preparing for the possibility of a chemical attack to follow the breakout of war. But defense officials and other Israeli leaders are saying that the danger has not completely passed and that Israel still has to be ready.
No, we have long experience in this, and we know that this is, we listened to the American statements that this could be a long engagement. We have made the preparations for our population. We've asked them to take certain precautions, asked the people to stay in their homes for the moment. So we have not relaxed our state of alert, but we follow things, as I said, very closely and wish the American and other forces full success.
Again, as the defense officials are saying, the danger here has not completely passed, but things are looking a lot better in Israel than they did even 12 hours ago. This is Linda Schertzer reporting live from Jerusalem.
And Linda, before you go, how long will the alert continue in Israel? It appears that there is a lull right now, but will the alert in Israel continue?
Well, the Army tells us that this is on indefinitely. We can't say for sure when it will end. Israelis are being told, as I said, to stay inside their homes, to be close to their gas masks. We have seen a number of people who are out on the streets. The Army clearly doesn't want that to happen, and the advisory is still on. People should stay inside until the danger has completely passed.
Thank you. CNN's Linda Schertzer keeping us up to date from Jerusalem. And this just in, the Soviets say that President Mikhail Gorbachev will address the nation on Soviet television within the hour. We will attempt to bring that to you live as it happens. Patrick.
Right now, for the very latest developments in eastern Saudi Arabia, let's check in with CNN's Charles Jaco, who's on the phone with us right now with the very latest. Charles?
Well, Patrick, there have been some preliminary, and I have to stress these are preliminary indications that air operations might possibly be continuing. This is based on three things. One, we've received a report from one of the journalist pools out in the field that reports about an hour and a half to 2 hours ago they saw a flight of 9 U.S. F-15s, 3 Kuwaiti Hawk model jets, and 4 British Tornado jets take off. Now, about the same time we were outside, we saw one squadron of F-15s, their afterburners glowing, arcing up into the cloudy sky and heading north toward the Kuwaiti border. We're not sure, of course, if all this means much of anything. These could be essentially reconnaissance in force flights. However, there is a handout from the British Armed Forces Information Desk here, which talks about the initial phase of the operation, which began this morning, and they stress initial, and they end the communique by saying operations continue. So there is some thought here that perhaps, and I have to stress perhaps, based on this evidence, there might be a second wave, at least preparing to be in progress. Again, there's no confirmation of that, but there has been a fairly heavy amount of air traffic in this area. One other thing we have to stress from here, there have been some reports, we understand it, of some sort of Iraqi Scud missiles that were launched in the direction of Saudi Arabia. We have checked with both U.S. and Saudi defense sources here,
and they categorically deny it. They say it's untrue. They say, as far as they know, during this entire operation, they have detected no sort of Iraqi counterstrike, either in the form of guided missiles or in the form, indeed, of airstrikes headed towards Saudi Arabia, that the skies have been completely clear. The one thing that the defense people here also want to stress is that ground forces have not even begun to be used yet, that there may be reason for optimism, but there is certainly no reason at this point to declare any sort of victory, because you have around 500,000 Iraqi forces still dug in Kuwait. And even if the reports are true that the Iraqi Air Force and most of their elite Republican guards have been destroyed, there is still the matter of all those troops in Kuwait that would have to be dislodged if they don't surrender, and they would have to be dislodged by a ground assault. But people here are watching and waiting to see what might happen next. Charles Jaco, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Charles, from your vantage point where you are in eastern Saudi Arabia, and we talked with our colleague John Sweeney a little while ago from Riyadh as we looked at some U.S. pool video of the F-15 Eagles taking off and preparing for the attacks earlier. From your vantage point, how many jets did you see taking off that actually took place in the attack into Iraq and into Kuwait earlier?
Well, the F-15s apparently, from everything we've been able to ascertain, played a major role in the attack, as did other sorts of fighters and fighter-bomber attack aircraft. Apparently, the only major plane in the U.S. arsenal that did not play a role in this attack was the large, lumbering B-52 bombers. We've been told that there are 20 of the B-52s, those, by aviation terms, ancient bombers, in the Middle East, in this area someplace, location undisclosed. But since they fly high and relatively slowly, the supposition among people who've been watching it is that they would not be used until the skies could pretty well be swept clean, if you will, of the Iraqi Air Force and Iraqi air defenses.
Okay, Charles Jaco reporting live from eastern Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much, and he will keep us updated on any developments from that point. Susan?
In Amman, Jordan, CNN's Tony Clark is standing by. Tony, as dawn breaks, as the morning gets underway in Jordan, what is the latest there?
Thanks, Susan. Perhaps some of the most interested in what's going on both in Iraq and in Kuwait are the Kuwaitis that are here. Jordan has been a site for many of the Kuwaitis who have fled their country in the wake of Iraq's invasion to come and wait for something to happen. Khalid Alanzi is a Kuwaiti who's here. He has been listening to the radio throughout the day. When you first heard that there were bombs falling on Baghdad, how did you feel? What did you do?
Well, I was surprised also, as everybody, because we are not looking for war. Nobody wants war. But Mr. Saddam Hussein, Mr. President Saddam Hussein, he looking for these things because he don't obey all the international opinion. He don't follow the laws of the people. He don't want peace. He's not looking for peace. That's why they started the war against him.
Well, one of the things you were telling me earlier, your reaction when you first heard that the bombs were falling, what did you do?
Well, I was crying and happy in the same time. I can't express my feeling to you because I was crying for my family in Kuwait, for the Iraqi people also in Iraq, and I was happy because I want to see my country free.
When do you hope to be able to go back to Kuwait?
Well, today, as soon as possible. I backed my thing now.
So that you think this may be over quickly, you can go back to Kuwait and see your family?
Yeah.
And what do you expect to see when you get back to Kuwait?
Well, just I want to see Kuwait. Just Kuwait, I want to see the sand of Kuwait, that's more than enough.
You left November 1st, you have been in Jordan, though, only 10 days. How was Kuwait when you left?
Well, it was a ghost city. Nothing in Kuwait, they stolen everything. There's nothing in Kuwait.
And what do you want to happen to Saddam Hussein? Is there anger? Is there fear? Is there sadness?
Saddam Hussein, somebody will punish him, his country, or his people. We have no right to punish him. Let his people punish him.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we have heard from Kuwaitis here in Jordan throughout the morning is they say we are wrong when we say that the war began today. They say for them, the war, the Persian Gulf War, began on August 2nd when Iraq came into Kuwait. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from Amman.
Thank you, Tony. And to recap, British Prime Minister John Major is expected to hold a news conference within the hour. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is also expected to address the Soviet people on Soviet television, also within the hour. We hope to bring both of those events to you live. Patrick.
And for the very latest, once again, let's go back to CNN correspondent John Holliman, who is on the phone with us right now from Baghdad. John, what's the latest?
Well, Patrick, Iraqi television tells us they are still attempting to feed a message from President Saddam Hussein to CNN and the world. The feed could come up at any time, but there's no pathway that we have determined as yet to get the pictures and sounds out of Baghdad to Jordan, which is where our satellite uplink is, so the CNN flyaway unit. So that's why we're having trouble getting those pictures and sounds to you. Situation in downtown Baghdad, no water. It needs electricity to be pumped. Electricity is still off. Telephones, wait. I was about to tell you telephones were still out, but as you can hear, telephone service has this instant been restored, at least to the point that phones will ring here. This may help us communicate with the TV station and get these pictures to you a little bit sooner. At any rate, the Iraqi government has issued a statement about the attack last night, saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, as we told you, is planning to address the Iraqi people. The Jordan, Iraq's closest ally in this region, perhaps at the moment, has closed its airspace to all incoming and outgoing flights, which means there's no way for any flight from Iraq to get to the outside world. And let's see, Saddam Hussein said in a Baghdad radio message that was broadcast about an hour ago, "The mother of all battles has started. Victory is very near." Those are two quotes from Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. On the streets of Baghdad, still very quiet. There's some traffic out there, still very foggy outside. John Holliman, CNN Live in Baghdad.
John, let me ask you a question that you were asked earlier about the damage. Obviously, you and your colleagues, Bernie Shaw and Peter Arnett, as well as some other CNN people, were in the hotel during the onslaught of all of the bombing around Baghdad. Again, though, as far as your own damage estimate, as you go out visually and look around, you don't see any major damage, at least from where you are near the hotel?
No, Patrick, we don't see any damage in the hotel, certainly none in the area that we can see from the hotel, and that takes you out about a mile or two, because we're up pretty high. Chris Krismanich, who's been to Iraqi television, says the TV station is just absolutely intact, and so she's been out further than we have, and she reports that there's no damage visible in downtown Baghdad, but we saw a lot of activity outside of town. One of the first places we're going to go today, if we get an opportunity to get in a vehicle and travel, and we're sure it's safe to do that, is out to the airport, the international airport. It looked to us like much of the fighting that was going on, much of the bombing that was being done was in the vicinity of Saddam International Airport. And we'll want to go there and take some pictures first to see if our estimate is in fact correct. And then if the Iraqi officials will allow it, we'll go around all over the countryside here and see just exactly what damage was done by the coalition attack overnight.
John, with your discussions with the Iraqi officials who... John, just stand by on the phone. We're going to go to Susan right now with a late development. Susan?
Apparently, we are going to pull video. This was shot yesterday as U.S. and multinational forces. We think it was shot yesterday as U.S. and multinational forces were getting ready for the overnight airstrike against Baghdad, an airstrike that our correspondent John Holliman and the CNN crew in Baghdad weathered and gave us live, harrowing accounts of the attack as it was underway. And just to give you a little bit of background, as we're watching this unedited U.S. pool tape, when the orders actually came for the fighter pilots to get under the way, the men assembled in the squad room very quickly, of course. In recent nights and for about the past week, they have made a point of sleeping very close to the squad room so that they could get there very quickly. They've been sleeping in nearby bunkers. They then received a highly technical briefing involving which bombers they would be escorting, which altitudes they would be flying, all sort of housekeeping things like this. We have just confirmed that this was shot yesterday. Again, as things actually heat up, The crews got the orders that which altitudes, which bombers they would be escorting, which refueling tankers they would use, and of course which targets the mission, their particular mission would be asked to destroy. Let's listen. Are looking at unedited U.S. pool tape. It was apparently shot yesterday as U.S. forces were getting ready for the overnight assault on Baghdad and reportedly also Kuwait. They are loading the bombs on the F-15 Eagle, part of the U.S. Air Force. It has a dual role as a fighter and an attack aircraft. CNN's Wolf Blitzer is joining us from the Pentagon as we continue to look at the pictures of the unedited U.S. pool tape.
Well, these F-15 Eagles are really the best U.S. air superiority fighter aircraft, and they obviously played a very important role in this initial U.S.-led airstrike. We're seeing some of these bombs and missiles that were attached to the F-15 before the airstrikes. Clearly, the fighter aircraft returned to these air bases in Saudi Arabia without their bombs, without their missiles. Most of these missiles are really what they call smart munitions, very sophisticated laser-guided, television-guided missiles that don't only fall, but these are called dumb bombs, but they can be directed in specific pinpointed locations. And once the AWACS, the air surveillance aircraft, the satellites, once all of the targets have been identified, then it's relatively easy for the sophisticated computer technology in these F-15 Eagles and other U.S. fighter bombers to go ahead and direct the missiles, the bombs, to the specific locations, the specific targets. And as we've been reporting all evening, the Pentagon officials with whom we've discussed this issue say that there were some very, very impressive, as far as the U.S. is concerned, very impressive strikes.
Well, we should also point out that these planes are fast. They are able to fly as much as 2.5 times the speed of sound. Just incredible machines.
That's right, and they're probably the best in the world. The Iraqis do have some excellent fighter aircraft of their own. The Soviet-made MiG-29s, the French-made F-1 Mirages. But Pentagon officials tell CNN that very few Iraqi planes even got off the ground to challenge the U.S. Aircraft that went in. Most of the Iraqi air bases appear to have been destroyed or knocked out of commission, allowing the United States now and its allies to basically have what the U.S. said it would always want to have in the initial hours of any strike, air superiority, be able to dominate the skies, and then basically at will decide what would be the outcome.
Well, have you been able to confirm how many U.S., British, and other Allied forces planes were able to get off the ground last night and participate in this airstrike against Baghdad?
Well, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney publicly used the figure hundreds, so that hundreds of aircraft were involved in this initial strike. We do know from an earlier briefing yesterday that the United States has about 1,700 combat aircraft, fixed-wing combat aircraft, and another almost equal number of combat helicopters in place. In addition, the Saudis have a relatively large air force with F-15s as well. The Kuwaitis have a modest air force. Many of their planes did manage to escape in the aftermath of the Iraqi invasion. Here we see some more of the ground crews taking some of these bombs, some of these missiles, and getting them ready to be loaded aboard these F-15 Eagles. Now, the F-15E is the best of the F-15s. There's the C and the D version, which are older, not as sophisticated, don't have the capabilities of the F-15E. And certainly the United States wanted to use the best of its aircraft, and these F-15s are among the best.
Wolf, do you have any update on a report that we got from Charles Jaco in eastern Saudi Arabia that he witnessed 9 F-15s from the United States, 3 Hawks from Kuwait, and 4 Tornadoes from the Great Britain, from the British Air Force, taking off from his vantage point, and that perhaps there was going to be some additional bombing taking place. Any word at all from the Pentagon?
No, Patrick. The word here at the Pentagon is that after this massive initial U.S. strike, the Pentagon and the other allies decided to pause. It shouldn't be all that surprising, though, that there have been some other planes taking off, even if it doesn't portend yet another round of airstrikes, because they want to make sure that the targets that were supposedly destroyed were in fact destroyed. So I wouldn't necessarily conclude from these initial reports from our colleague Charles Jaco in Saudi Arabia that this means that the United States and the Allies are yet again starting a second round of airstrikes. Here we see some more unedited tape from the Pentagon pool. Some of these missiles that are getting ready to be put aboard some of the U.S. fighter aircraft. Obviously, this took place just before the United States went ahead and took the offensive and undertook this massive strike. Let's see if we can hear what they're saying. These are ground crews. U.S. Air Force ground crews in Saudi Arabia. We're not allowed to say, according to the Pentagon ground rules, exactly where this base is located.
Wolf, presumably if the attack was as successful as the Pentagon leads us to believe, then obviously the added advantage of being able to bomb with these F-15 Eagles at night with their sophisticated computer technology, obviously then that would not be as difficult to go in and bomb during the day where they could use more visual targeting. Is that correct?
Clearly, if the U.S. does have complete air superiority and has destroyed most of the anti-aircraft missile batteries, the anti-aircraft artillery placements, then the United States Air Force and the other allied air forces involved in what is now called Desert Storm, they could go ahead and undertake these kinds of strikes in plain daylight. But certainly the Air Force, the Navy, the Pentagon wanted to begin this operation at night to take advantage of the U.S. night fighting capability.
Wolf, this is Susan again. Reportedly, the F-15 Eagles would, in several military analysts, make up the initial scenario, the initial thrust into Iraq-occupied Kuwait. From your sources in the Pentagon, was it primarily F-15s or a whole series of other craft?
What we're told, it was several U.S. aircraft, both carrier-based as well as ground-based. Certainly the F-117A stealth fighters, about 40 or 50 of them are in place. They were sent in to knock out some of the most dangerous strategic targets, and they supposedly are invisible to enemy aircraft. In addition, F-16s, excellent planes. The A-6s, the carrier-based, the Intruder, were told that they didn't actually take off from the carriers. They went into forward air bases close to the line, and from there, after the pilots had a chance to rest up a little bit, they then took off from the ground and unloaded their bombs at the targets in Kuwait and Iraq and returned to these forward air bases.
Wolf, excuse me, we are going back to Baghdad. CNN's John Holliman. John, what is the latest? We're hearing reports that you are under attack.
I'm afraid that's true, Susan. It's happened once at night. Now it's daytime. Very foggy outside. I'm going to let you hear the sounds as I hear them out the window. There's a little blue sky overhead. We don't see any of the flashes of light that we were seeing in the dark night that occurred a while ago. You can hear, though, I believe, the anti-aircraft guns as they fire up into the sky here. It's so foggy, we're unable to see anything. But we heard far, far away, about 3 or 4 minutes ago, the first bombs falling here. This is eerie. Eerie is the right word. They're birds, look like doves, flying around our hotel, fairly shaken up by all the new sounds that are being heard out in Baghdad. I see a group of people running out of one government building near the tomb of the unknown soldier here in Baghdad. Obviously, the sounds of the fighting have shaken them up, and they're trying to get to some place of safety. For the past month and a half, Iraqi television has been telling the people of Baghdad what to do for civil defense, how to get to places of safety. And as we look at the 8-lane highway in front of our hotel, I see a taxi cab going down the road about 30 miles an hour backwards in reverse. The driver obviously trying to get away from the source of all that sound. We, in our CNN crew, as we've been preparing for what might happen next, never anticipated we'd see something else happening in the daylight. And from our vantage point, we really can't see, because of the heavy, thick fog, what is going on, but we can certainly hear the sound. There's been a lull. Well, I just heard another bomb blast, but I'm sure a bomb blast at a distance very far from our hotel. I would say maybe 5 or 10 miles. It sounds like the firing of 26-inch guns from a battleship, actually, when you're, maybe 20 or 30 miles away from the battleship. It's just very loud explosions, but at a very great distance away. And I'll try to describe, now that we have some daylight, I can at least give you a better picture of the street scenes here. There are still cars going up and down on this street, but many cars are traveling in reverse. This is like you're watching a motion picture played backwards. Cars are doing anything they can to scramble to get off the street. I see a public school bus now that's making a turn to get off of this main street in downtown Baghdad. From the sounds of it, what battle is going on some far distance away from where we are.
John, let me just ask you in terms...
It's pretty calm right now. What I'll do is, Susan, see if you have any other questions for me or the rest of our CNN team members. It's Mark Biello, our cameraman, has just walked in the room. Mark, can you see anything from either side of the hotel?
No, on the east side of the building, there was some sporadic anti-aircraft fired, but nothing as of now. It just seemed like some sporadic shooting and maybe only 1 or 2 fighters, and may not even have been a full attack.
Yeah, right. So, Charles Jaco, of course, saw some planes taking off about 30 or 40 minutes ago from his position in Saudi Arabia, and that perked up our ears and made us a little bit more interested in listening out the windows here. It appears it's quiet again, Susan. Let me come over so that I can hear what you have to say. Go ahead.